Greetings, neighbors. My name is Phyllis Leon, and I am the president of the South Loop Concern Coalition, also known as the SLCC. We are a nonprofit and volunteer organization in the Chicago South Loop, formed in response to a Wisconsin developer's public renderings and plan for One Central. Our mission is to increase community awareness and have transparency about this project. Today, we are talking with our esteemed panel of experts about One Central. Professor Joseph Schweiderman is a professor at DePaul and Director of Urban Planning and Transportation. Mr. John Talbot, a civil engineer and attorney with vast expertise in infrastructure, construction, and was involved with the McCormick Place expansion built over the railroad tracks south of One Central. Mr. John Filan, a former state budget director and managing partner of a regional accounting firm. Our moderators today are two of our SLCC board members, Ms. Joan Lovell and Mr. Jeffrey Key. Welcome. Professor Joseph Schweiderman is a professor at DePaul and Director of Urban Planning and Transportation.
The state of Illinois has committed $6.5 billion toward the first phase of construction of the One Central mega development. That phase is called the Civic Build, and we want to have a better understanding of what the Civic Build is and what taxpayers are getting in return for this very expensive investment. Professor Schweiderman, the taxpayers' investment in the Civic Build revolves around a proposed transit hub. The developer says a transit hub in this location will drive economic growth on the south side, and One Central is ideal because the Metric electric lines are already there. Amtrak and the CTA have the potential to join at some time in the future, and the McCormick busway can be used for a Shy Line circulator to get people to the museum campus and Soldier Field. You have enormous expertise in urban transportation, and you've had a chance to review this proposal. What are your views?
I've studied this carefully and just don't see the dynamics of a hub being possible down there. You look at almost every urban transit hub, it's either close proximity to downtown or it's kind of an historic crossing point. Here we have a development on an active metro line, and indeed there could be a stop there for metro, but there isn't a whole lot of potential for a hub to develop, which implies connecting passengers, people moving from one train or bus to another. The opportunity for the CTA to get trains in there, we can see is really a long shot and something that almost certainly wouldn't meet the criteria for federal funding. And without that, you basically have a metro station without connecting potential and a long shot at best that Amtrak will want to establish a stop there. Just a few minutes out of Union Station, it's Mid-America Hub. So I just don't think the hub idea is workable in almost any way.
So let's break that down a little bit. The Metro electric lines are already there. Where are they coming from, and who would they bring into the site?
Sure, it's a metro line I've been riding for almost 30 years, and it's the old Illinois Central Main Line, and trains run from University Park via Hyde Park downtown, and there are trains every 20 minutes on weekdays, through that part of the city, and there's a couple branches. But you look at adding much rail beyond that, and there really hasn't been any feasibility studies, any expressed interest by the agencies in doing more than that. Of course, there's opportunities for buses and that sort of thing, but that really doesn't add up to a hub. You could argue the development might be well served by transit, but that's a far cry from saying we're going to have a major hub, right at that spot.
And what goes into a hub? What does make an effective hub?
Well, in some cases, you can create hubs at spots that are strategically important. You look at the Lautenberg Transportation Center in New York, where they created a hub where two rail lines crossed, and there wasn't a station. So you can create hubs if the geographic circumstances allow for that. Here, I think you need some reason for people to get off, say the Metro Electric connect to something else. And of course, you could look at pulling the CTA green or orange line in there, but that's a hundreds of millions of dollar proposition that almost surely would be uh, met with great skepticism. So I just don't see the opportunity having a connection at that point is giving you a wider range of geographic options when you can stay on the train another 12 blocks, 14 blocks, go downtown and have the world at your fingertips.
If the developer were to be able to bring CTA to the site, what are the physical characteristics or restrictions that would have to be overcome to do that?
You're building a transit line in a fairly dense part of the city. So were you to build a spur into the site, if you look at the geometry of the area, to make the curve to get on the St. Charles Airline off the Green Line, there would be some demolition required. You'd probably have to take away roughly a good part of a block of buildings just to get to the St. Charles Airline, perhaps more. If trains came from both directions of the spur, there would be even more demolition required. Even onto the airline, you have some complexities because you're running alongside a freight railroad and a passenger railroad, so you have to have separate rights of way. And then bring the line below grade or below ground to get to the actual One Central development. So there's a lot of moving parts there that would generate some big opposition. Perhaps even the noise of the trains along the St. Charles Airline above ground wouldn't be welcomed by the neighborhood. It's a big lift.
When you're talking about an effective transit hub, what is it that you want people to be able to use that hub to do?
Sure. You really look for well-coordinated, well-planned connections that allow you to multiply the number of destinations you can reach, in this case by bus or train. So instead of just having the stops on your line, you can connect, and those routes take you to many more locations like that. And you look around the city, we have hubs in different spots, Union Station being a great example. Here, the opportunity to make those connections doesn't seem terribly plausible, that people have a lot of reason to treat this as a connecting point in which they can get from point A to point B faster and easier than they might through other locations.
So if someone were to be coming in on the existing Metro line that already runs there, what would their connections be to get into the downtown area of the Greater South Loop?
Well, right now, very little or nothing. I mean, there's a Metro stop already at McCormick Place and 18th Street. They're lightly used. There's a couple buses you can connect to. I think the vision is to create a whole spectrum of services out of this spot. And I think what I see this is geographically problematic, just given the layout of the way our transit system works. And secondly, to build a hub there, like adding CTA rail, you're probably going to have to reduce trains to some other parts of the city. So if you were to route Orange Line trains through there from Midway, say hypothetically, you would probably reduce the number of Orange Line trains going from Midway to downtown. So there's a real opportunity cost, and you're going to get some heavy opposition when you start diverting trains to this location because it really is a stub, one-stop spur you would build that wouldn't get people to the downtown district where the vast majority of good connections can be made.
You said it's unlikely that CTA or Amtrak would join. When you're considering the physical feasibility of joining those two lines to this location, what are the factors that you're looking at?
I look at urban transit lines. The vast majority either are lines that bring people downtown. We have a high density of office workers. You have, of course, the whole legacy of dense development. or they're developed in response to connect people to the lines that bring people downtown, where you have, spurs that have easy connections. In this case, I doubt many people would want to take the train to One Central as a destination in itself enough to justify a rail line. So here we're building a spur. Again, it's not even clear whether that spur, how it would be linked to the rest of the system. It's not particularly clear what function that would serve in our transit system, given that you could easily provide efficient bus service from this development to downtown, or take the Metro Electric. So the CTA line, this is a bit of an enigma to me as to what that's going to bring us in terms of better transportation.
Well, you probably know about as much as anyone about the Chicago transit system. What is your sense of the feasibility of Amtrak and CTA ever joining into One Central this way?
I think Amtrak, if I could guess, would take a wait and see approach. Show me the hub works, and call us when when this is a really vibrant development. Even then, I think they would be greatly resistant, because they're building Union Station as their premier hub, and every time you stop a train, it adds 4 or 5 minutes to the schedule, and they just don't really do that. They run out 20 miles to the first stop, pick up people in suburbia, and then run express to the next town. And again, there could be exceptions, but boy, in this case, it's awfully close to their endpoint. And I think it'd be more likely they'd want to stop and say Hyde Park or somewhere where there's a little more distance to downtown, so it would feel more like a traditional Amtrak stop with a destination where there's a lot of historic development.
The ridership that exists now, is that enough if the developer were to put a building there for them to come into? Would that drive economic growth on the south side at all?
Well, I think when it's the developer's got a real problem, because when you're that close to downtown, you really don't see a lot of people getting on commuter trains, buying a regular ticket. And on Sunday, the trains are, every hour or so, every 2 hours on some routes. And you want to see, probably if you're traveling between One Central and downtown, more heavy reliance on bus. Of course, if a CTA line was already there, that would be attractive, but it's not. So I think the bus options are probably up Lakeshore Drive most effective for this development. Using Metro Electric to extent it helps you, but I just don't see the Metro itself driving a lot of development, right at that spot.
Do you know what the ridership is on the Metro today?
Well, the Metro Electric's been a successful line. It's been declining. I will say that we don't see really heavy usage at the McCormick Place stop, which is just a few blocks away. I get on there a lot. I think it's again that sort of mode choice. When you're that close to downtown, people want services every few minutes. They don't want to plan a schedule, look at the schedule and plan when they're only going to go a few miles. They just want to walk up and go. And I think that's where Metro will be useful for this development, but won't be the kind of panacea that maybe the developer expects.
And so if a transit building is put at this location, if I'm hearing you correctly, it doesn't really work as a hub in the conventional sense of how that term is used.
That's exactly right. I think the developer aspires to create a hub by adding new rail lines into here, and bus, of course. And, look for technical analysis on how that would work. And it's mostly been big ideas and generalities at this point, not followed with a lot of technical analysis on whether this would meet the requirements for federal funding, whether it would add to CTA ridership enough to justify diverting resources. Right now, we have a real equity problem in transportation. The poor neighborhoods, low-income neighborhoods often have subadequate service, and boy, putting your putting your resources into a new development that's likely going to be more affluent, has real equity implications. Doesn't mean you don't do it, but you certainly study it carefully and make sure you're not robbing Peter to pay Paul.
And the proposal here in terms of getting folks on the metro lines, and even if there were an Amtrak or a CTA connection, does that serve the populations you just talked about, the underserved neighborhoods that we're trying to reach?
It really doesn't. I mean, you could envision bus lines fanning out from this development, bringing workers to One Central. Again, I'm not sure the market is there for that. The retail climate is just pretty awful right now. And I think you can envision, if it's a massive retail development, having lots of jobs for people in the area, a lot of hospitality. But I just don't think that's going to be the kind of development we're going to see happen real quick in the post-pandemic environment. If it does succeed, it may be heavily residential, and that's not the kind of land use you typically see for a transit hub. You like to see, a mix of jobs that make it a focal point for the economy. Again, I don't have a crystal ball, but don't forget we're coming out of a pandemic where retail development may be really sluggish.
Are you aware of whether or not the CMAP, the Chicago Metropolitan Agency for Planning, has ever suggested this location?
No, I don't believe, fairly certain it's not on their list of priority projects. There's a whole set of steps you take for that to get on the list of unconstrained projects, and then constrained projects in which, depending on funding, there's a lot of technical analysis that goes with that. And this is things have kind of been flipped here, where in some cases funding commitments have been made before the hard work of that has happened, with alternative analysis. If you were to build a hub, what are the best alternatives? And what if we, build light rail versus CTA versus bus? All that stuff would want to be looked at. And, it's odd that a state with such a huge budget deficit wouldn't insist on that before promises for checks start being dispatched.
So if I'm hearing you correctly, you're not in the least convinced that this would be a successful location for a transit hub.
No, in fact, we see it as a zero-sum game, that you're going to spend less somewhere else. And the momentum for Union Station, which is really, I think, a high priority project, this would chip away at that effort. So I think you captured my views correctly.
Mr. John Talbot, a civil engineer and attorney with vast expertise in infrastructure, construction, and was involved with the McCormick Place expansion built over the railroad tracks south of One Central.
John Talbot, you are a civil engineer with extensive experience in these large buildings, and I understand that you also were involved in one of the McCormick Place buildings that is built over tracks. Is that right?
That is correct.
Tell us a little bit about that.
I was involved in the McCormick Place 2 and McCormick Place 3 portions, which are the large exhibit halls on the south side of Cermak. And in particular, McCormick Place 2 was built directly over the South Shore Metro tracks that enter into this site.
And are there any engineering and cost differences in putting a large building over railroad tracks as opposed to building on a vacant lot?
Yes, the complexities of building over a operating railroad system are immense. The general design of the buildings have to take into account the noise and vibrations of them. The operating tracks become an impediment to construction and safety during development. There are just many, many, many complexities that really result in a cost premium of 20 to 30% for the project.
One Central is entirely built over railroad tracks, isn't that right?
That is correct. It's being built over the Walden Yards, but to what extent the Walden Yards will be relocated is really unknown at this point in time.
But virtually the entire One Central site is above tracks that exist today.
That is correct. The tracks run directly north-south through the entire development.
And that is a much larger portion of the foundation of One Central than the tracks represented for the foundation of McCormick Place.
That is true.
All right, so does that also add to the cost for One Central in putting its buildings up?
Yes, building over the railroad tracks is a very substantial incremental cost increase for this project as opposed to any other type of major development.
We've heard a number of presentations from One Central, and what we know is that there is $6.5 billion in Illinois tax money from all of the state of Illinois going towards what One Central calls the civic build. Can you tell us what the civic build is?
From the information that's been provided, the civic build is a platform that stretches from the north end of McCormick Place to McFetridge Drive, so approximately 3,500 feet in length. So it's the platform that goes over the railroad tracks, but then it is much more. It is the development of approximately a 7-story high building, entire length. Incorporate parking garages, the entertainment venue, retail, and the traffic hub.
Is the $6.5 billion for the civic build the same as saying $6.5 billion for a transportation hub?
No, it is not.
And why? Because we keep hearing it's 6.5 billion for a transit hub. Why is that not the case?
But the transit hub proper is really akin to the other train stations that we have in Chicago, such as the Randolph Street Station, Union Station, Ogilvy Transportation Center, or the LaSalle Street Station. Each of those facilities, when you look at the total length of the train platforms and the public areas servicing those platforms, in each of those cases, there are approximately 1,000 feet long to accommodate all of that. The civic build portion of One Central extends over 3,500 feet long, much beyond the boundaries of the transit hub.
And how tall is a typical transit hub?
Again, as you look at these other stations in the Chicago area, most of them are 2 to 3 stories or levels, and I should call them levels in height to accommodate the trains and the public service area. I don't believe any of them are more than 4 stories high, maximum.
And how tall is the civic build that One Central is proposing?
One Central is proposing a 7-story high platform for virtually the entire length of the project.
And that 7-story platform, we don't see much from One Central on what this development would look like from the neighborhood, from looking from west to east. Looking west to east, what would that 7-story platform look like from the neighborhood?
From the renderings that have been provided, the 7-story platform is absolutely continuous from McFetridge south to the north end of McCormick Place. That would essentially be a continuous 7-story building that from street level would block views to the east, create shadows to the west in the morning hours, et cetera. But it would be a continuous 7-story high building the entire length of the development.
So that sounds like a wall.
Yes, it is most definitely the wall of a building.
So how many neighborhoods are you aware of that have a 7-story wall running 10 blocks or the length of a neighborhood?
I certainly don't know of any developments that have a continuous building anywhere close to that length.
My understanding is that this civic build that's being paid for by the taxpayers is more than just the proposed transit hub.
Yes, I believe that is absolutely correct.
So the taxpayers are putting in $6.5 billion. What are they paying for?
They're paying for the full foundation systems for all of the private build components, which are incrementally, substantially larger and more involved than just a platform over railroad tracks. When you're talking 50, 60, 70-story buildings, the infrastructure, caissons, foundation systems, et cetera, to support those buildings are absolutely massive. And is being paid for as part of the civic build.
So then, if I understand you correctly, this proposed civic build that the taxpayers are going to be buying is far more than just a proposed transit hub.
Yes, it is.
But the lower layers of the civic build also include some 3,500 garage spaces. Is that right?
Yes, included in the civic build component of this project is certainly parking that is required for the development. It includes the portions of the retail space and the entertainment venue space.
So then there are upper layers to the platform or the civic build that include the buildings we'll see, correct?
That is correct.
Is there a requirement that this platform be built as a 7-story wall running the length of the neighborhood in order for us to have a transportation hub?
No, there is absolutely no requirement for that. That is simply a concept that is being put forth by this particular project.
Is it possible that the individual buildings could, or the vertical build of One Central could support their own parking needs?
Yes, generally that is what the private build portion of a development entails.
But in this case, One Central seeks $6.5 billion in taxpayer dollars to create this massive civic build, which has a transportation hub in the center of it, but is far more than just a railroad station for a couple of trains that are meeting up.
Oh, that is correct. Again, as we said, the transit hub occupies 1,000, maybe 1,200 lineal feet of area in the center of the project. To the north of 14th Place and to the south of 18th Street, those areas are not directly supporting the transit hub. These areas are requiring very, very extensive infrastructure to support the residential development to the north and and south, and all of the commercial private build development in the central portion of the project.
The residential and commercial development of One Central itself, you mean?
Yes, that is correct.
The project is proposed to take 20 years. What effect, if any, will 20 years of construction at One Central have on the neighborhood?
All construction causes a great deal of noise, vibration, air quality, nuisance to the immediate neighborhood. You can look to the recent construction of NEMA to the north, and it was well documented the number of complaints regarding the construction of that singular facility. To extend this type of construction over a continuous 20-year period would be very disruptive to the neighborhood.
There's been some discussion about density. One Central has a certain FAR, and I know that that's a term of art, this floor area ratio, which basically has to do with the density of a development. And can you speak to the density issues involved with One Central's proposal?
Yes, I think it's very fair to compare the density of One Central to some of the other mega developments that have been proposed in the city of Chicago recently. The Michael Reese Hospital mega development, just to the south of McCormick Place, is requesting a FAR of 4.06 with a total building of about 9.3 million square feet of new space. Even the 78 has an FAR of 5.65 and 13 million square feet of space. In comparison, One Central is asking for an FAR of 16.43, or 3 to 4 times greater density than either the 78 or Michael Reese, and are asking for a total of 22 million square feet of development compared to 13 million square feet for the 78 or 9 million square feet for Michael Reese. So it is, again, over double in absolute square footage of new construction.
And it's true that Michael Reese and the 78 both are building within existing FAR. Isn't that right?
That is my understanding, yes, very comparable to existing.
And is One Central's 16.43 FAR, or 22 million square feet, within its existing FAR?
No, it is not. Again, the city of Chicago did a major presentation last year where the remaining FAR that's allowable on this site is approximately 4.5, 4.6 versus their ask of 16.43.
John, can you tell us if there is current infrastructure, as you've talked about infrastructure being sewer lines, water lines, other public utilities? Is the neighborhood's infrastructure adequate for what One Central is proposing?
22 million square feet of new building in a very limited area has never been planned for in the city of Chicago. So I think it's very safe to say that the current infrastructure to support this new developments, infrastructure does not exist, and substantial changes will be required to support it. Infrastructure is not, when you talk about the roads and streets and sewer and water, extends well beyond the boundaries of a individual project. So to be able to to bring water to this site, to take sewage away from the site, to accommodate the stormwater drainage, to bring roads and traffic to the site will really require planning for a very large geographic area to support this kind of development.
Will that create any kind of a stress on the neighborhood in terms of the systems or how to access this infrastructure to increase it?
Well, the current infrastructure simply does not contemplate this type of development in any way, shape, or form. And what the solutions will be involve virtually every department within the city of Chicago to try to figure out what can be done to service this site. But it would have far-reaching effects through the neighborhood and the near south side of Chicago.
Thank you, John.
Mr. John Filan, a former state budget director and managing partner of a regional accounting firm.
Can you just explain for us in a very brief overview what the commitment of the taxpayers is? What are we paying and over what time?
The state is being asked to enter into a contractual obligation in law to pay $6.5 billion to support this project over 20 years.
Has the debt since 2019 gone down, or what's been the effect of the pandemic on that debt load?
I don't have an exact number, but in almost every case, in every government, their debts have gone up, of course, due to the pandemic. And much of this debt, not all, but much of this debt will have increased due to that.
You've talked about the debt that we had in 2019, and we have prepared a chart that shows that debt. Can you walk us through it? What are the components of that?
Sure. There's basically four components that make up the $225 billion of obligations the state has, or liabilities that they have. The first one is in the state's annual budget. That budget is has a $7 billion deficit in it, meaning they have $7 billion of bills from the previous year that have not gotten paid during that year. So it carries over to the next year. So that's a day-to-day problem. They have $28 billion of what are called the state's general obligation bonds. And that means the state's guarantees full faith and credit behind those. Those bonds are not unusual to have. They're generally for construction work of hospitals, schools, state police headquarters, things like that. And that debt's been pretty stable over the years. The third one, as we get larger, is one that is basically retirees' health benefits as distinct from pensions. And that is currently reported as of 2019 at $54 billion to be funded. The state only, right now, they only do what's called pay-as-you-go. And that is the amount of health benefits that are paid to retirees for that year. They don't pay anything towards the liability that's growing. And that final one, which is akin to the retiree health care benefits, is the unfunded pension liability that a lot of people have heard about. And that, as of 2019, it's $137 billion. It's almost quadrupled in the last 15 to 20 years, and will continue to increase unless some definitive action is taken. So of these four debts, the $7 billion, the $54 billion, the $137 billion are all growing, and there's nothing in place yet to flatten them out or have them decrease.
And this one central obligation is an additional $6.5 billion to that. Is that right?
Yeah, over 20 years, that's an obligation. That's
so
correct.
that's close to the 7 billion deficit that existed in 2019 in the general operating fund. It's a big number.
It's a big number. Yeah, the numbers cover different periods of time, but there's still obligations. 6.5 billion is 6.5 billion, and 7 billion is 7 billion.
So we're taking on quite a big additional debt load to pay for the civic build that's been discussed. What are the terms of this? What we pay over 20 years? Do we own the civic build?
Not until we have paid all the money out over 20 years, and then we have the option to own the building. And in the meantime, it was 20 years, any revenues coming from the project will go to the developer, not to the state.
So even though we're on this commitment that there's 20 years worth of the developer getting the use and the revenue and the benefits of the transit building. Is that right?
That's correct.
And at the end of the 20 years, do we, as taxpayers, have the right to any of the other elements that are there beyond this building?
No, to my understanding, we only have rights to the transit hub itself, not to all the other infrastructure support to other buildings that we help pay for.
And the developer is saying that there's going to be a lot of new sales tax revenue that's going to help us pay this big debt. What happens if you're right and he's wrong and we don't have a lot of new tax revenue? Are the taxpayers still obligated to pay this bill?
Yeah, the state will have a contractual obligation to pay the entire cost of $6.5 billion. And it will come from the state's general fund, specifically from sales tax revenue, as is spelled out in the law that was passed. So that same revenue is used for everything else in the state: schools, mental health hospitals, state police, and so on. So either you have to find more revenue or you have to reduce spending somewhere else.
So if this project isn't successful, other programs are going to pay for it.
Correct. I mean, that's
Or they're going to suffer.
Yeah. Yes.
Okay. And
more than likely, someone's going to suffer. Either taxpayers are going to pay more taxes, or some programs are not going to have enough money to even keep what they're already spending.
And the taxpayers that are paying for this, is this just the sales revenue from this particular project, or are taxpayers across the state on the hook for this?
The liability for paying it is from taxpayers across the state.
And if the development falls short, we're still paying out how much per year?
It starts out, I think, in 2023 at about $200 million a year, and then increases most years up till the 20th year to $400 million approximately per year.
The developer has been pretty clear that this isn't a TIF, that he's not asking for TIF funds. What's the difference between a TIF and what's happening here? The 78, which is a mega development very close to here, is getting a $500 million TIF. What's the difference between how that's paid and how this obligation is being handled?
A TIF, which stands for tax increment financing, means just that if there is an area where there's proposed development to take place, and the developer is looking for some support, they only get that support to the extent to which increased taxes occur. So if someone builds a plant in an area, as a result, that new plant will now have property taxes that were before that zero. That would be part of the tax increase or tax increment. Similarly true if, as a result of that plant, some people open up businesses and they pay sales tax, that in some tip agreements, that sales tax also is money they otherwise wouldn't have. So it only comes from the success, if you will, of the project. There's not a otherwise guarantee of any money for a project that's in a typical TIF agreement.
If someone had asked you as the former state budget director or even as a managing partner of a regional accounting firm, your advice on how good a deal this was, what would you have told them?
Well, based on what's been presented, I would oppose it. And I think every budget director that I'm acquainted with would, I think, oppose it as well, because the information is just insufficient to provide any confidence that the state will benefit or get sales tax revenue far down the road if all of this comes together. And it's just too many maybes and too many assumes.
Thank you, neighbors, for joining us today. We hope that you found our panelists informative. For more information and how you can get involved, please visit our website, southloopconcerncoalition.org. Thank you.
Thank you all for joining us. Please send any comments or questions to southloopcoalition@gmail.com. Thanks again.